Hi, my name is Bill Cordua, and I'm a geologist associated with the University of Wisconsin River Falls. My purpose in this series of short videos is to acquaint you with the wonderful geology that surrounds us all the time here in Pierce-St. Croix County. Today, we're down in Glen Park in River Falls, Wisconsin, right here looking at the lower falls. This has been a popular place for gathering and for recreation for River Falls residents ever since the town really began. And we have these beautiful waterfalls coming over this rock in a wonderful canyon. The water power represented by these waterfalls through town was very important to the early settlers. They dammed up most of these streams for power for grist, for timber, and for milling of flour. There was once a large dam here, as a matter of fact, but flooding eventually washed it away. And once that happened, the river reoccupied its valley, and these falls re-emerged from that. There are also a similar series of waterfalls underneath Lake George and River Falls that are currently under that reservoir, but would be exposed if the dam were ever removed. Well, the bedrock here is the oldest rock we see exposed in the River Falls area, and it's a rock formation called the Prairie du Chien group. This is a widespread rock that you can trace all up and down the Mississippi River. It forms the bluff tops as you drive down through the little towns of Pepin and Hager City and Maiden Rock, so you're probably very familiar with seeing it. And it also underlies pretty much all of River Falls. We see it exposed where rivers cut down to it, both the Kennebec River and the South Fork tributary, which I'm in right here. The Prairie du Chien rock is composed mostly of a rock us geologists call dolostone. Dolostone is a lot like limestone, except it has a bit more magnesium in it. And this rock seems to be pretty resistant to erosion and the climate we find around here, which is why it forms these cliff faces that we can see around us. The Prairie du Chien group was deposited in a very shallow sea, a sea that probably was exposed at low tide and then flooded at high tide. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, how do geologists know these sorts of things? I mean, this is talking about a scenario where this sea existed here maybe 480 million years ago or so. So how do we really reconstruct that type of history? Well, if you look around Glen Park, you'll see plenty of clues as to what kind of environment existed way back in time at the time these rocks were being deposited here in our area. We know from modern examples that limey mud is often deposited in warm, shallow seas, such as the Bahamas Bank. Here's a picture of that region taken from a small aircraft, and will give you an idea of what River Falls might have looked like 490 million years ago. Notice the fine sandy bottom, which is mostly a limy precipitate, and also notice all the channels, dunes, and ripples where shallow water currents have moved the sediment around. Studying these places gives us clues to recognizing such environments when preserved in ancient rocks. You can also see this is a really tough area to do field work in, huh? If you look around the rock surface by the falls, you'll see that some of them have patterns of cracks and ridges. These are desiccation cracks or mud cracks. They form when wet sediment dries out. We see these in modern mud puddles, and they might have been formed at times when tide was out, indicating that this was pretty shallow water. Nearby we have examples of some ridges on the bedding plains. These are called ripple marks, and they are formed by currents that move sediment around when they were soft particles on the seafloor. I'll bet many people have climbed over these without realizing what they are. If you go up on top of the swinging bridge and look down, you can see even more of them. You can see the ripple mark surface on the bedding plane right under the bridge. It's hard to imagine that this was an ocean current washing a tidal flat millions of years ago. But there are other clues in these rocks that tell geologists more about the ancient environment. Here's a view taken underwater in the Bahamas. There's plenty of life there. Was there life here too when our rocks were being deposited? If so, can we find their fossils? It turns out that there are some fossils in these rocks, but we have to go to another part of Glen Park in order to see them. Well, right now I'm down at the mouth of Bartosh Creek, just below the lower dam along the Kennebec River. This is a popular place not only for fishermen, for people to put kayaks and canoes into the water for the beautiful float trip down the Kinney. But this rock exposure right here is certainly worth looking at. The mouth of Bartosh Canyon is a place where the river flows right across some bedding plains within the Prairie du Chien group. You notice here the bedding plains are not actually flat. They slope a little bit this way, which is unusual, and then they come back up on the other side. And that's because of this structure behind me. Now if you do look around on these rocks, you'll be able to see evidence of mud cracks, you'll be able to see evidence of ripple marks and such, as we saw at the last exposure. But this particular mound here is pretty unique because it has some fossils in it. These are fossils that are called stromatolites, and you can find them by just looking at the wavy marks on top of that polished rock surface, as we'll look at here in just a moment. Notice the strange patterns on the rock surface. These are what geologists call stromatolites. They are deposits made by photosynthesizing microorganisms, which we call cyanobacteria. These little fellows build mounds made out of sticky mud on the seafloor and are often large enough to form small reefs. This curving surface is the top of one of these reefs, and the whole bedding plane here in the river is made of many stromatolites. This is a stromatolite in side view, which is exposed on a cliff face downstream from Clifton Hollow. The rhythmic banding makes these mounds look a lot like cabbage heads in side views. Stromatolites are fossils that tell us that this formed underwater, and the water needed to be shallow enough for photosynthesis to occur. But what evidence is there that this was salty and not fresh water? One of the layers in Bartosh Creek exposes these square holes. This layer has since eroded away, but luckily I photographed it. These squares are formed by salt crystals that were deposited in the mud when it was soft sediment. This tells us not only that the water was shallow, but it was also salty. The salt is now long gone, but the imprints remain. So as you can see, by using the evidence in the rocks, the sedimentary structures, the kind of fossils we have here, we can easily interpret that this area was once a warm, salty sea. That's what's known as reading the rocks to interpret their history.